everyone. I have another amazing guest with us this week. And as always, I always say this to you, I want you to know about all the people in the world that are doing things for teens and young adults so that as a parent, you just have this list of all these people that you can reach out to or people you can listen to or read their website or whatever. And teens also who are listening and young adults that there are these people out there for you as well that you can reach out to and get help from. Because as much as I would love to work with all the teens in the world and all the young people in the world, I can't. And like, we need lots of people out here being our support system. And so I want you to know about Joanna Lilly. She is my guest today, and she is a consultant that actually is sort of like a matchmaker for you to do all sorts of things. Some of it is mental health related, like you might need some outpatient treatment, you might need some residential level treatment. Maybe you just want a gap year experience because you've been in college, but you don't really know what direction and you just don't really know if you want to stay there. Or maybe you know that college is someday, but you don't really know what to do between that high school, college time. She does a lot of things, and I'm going to let her tell you mostly about it because I don't want to mess it up and say things that she doesn't do. But I just want you to think about like that this is for 18 plus for the most part. So these are adults, maybe adults still in high school, finishing up their schooling, still living at home, or maybe adults that are done with high school, still living at home, or maybe went to college, didn't know what to do. But Joanna, thank you for being with us and tell us all about yourself.
Well, Cynthia, thank you again for having me. As you said, I am a consultant. All of my clients are 18 years of age or older, so it could be their 18th birthday. Every once in a while, I will speak with a parent or parenting unit that has a 18-year, like their birthday is in 2 weeks. They're 17 years old and almost turning 18. What do we do? But those conversations are few and far between. And when they do happen, I'm really clear that the next step is to speak with that young adult when they turn 18.
Hmm.
So you kind of started to touch on some of the pieces of the work that I do. My job is not to do legwork for young adults behind the scenes. They are actually involved in the process with me. In fact, they're the ones that are making the decision whether or not they want to work with me. And it is to figure out exactly what you described. It is a spectrum of unknowns. Do we need a retreat or an intensive? Do you need like a one-on-one mentoring experience? Do you need a new therapist or psychiatrist? Do you need some sort of, residential treatment program, you name it, or a gap experience that maybe includes having a coach or a therapist involved in that program? I mean, it feels like, as I describe it, that there's no way to know all that exists, but I certainly know a lot because
Hmm.
I have honed in on this very young adult specific population. So all of the resources that I have are catered towards that population. My background as being trained as a therapist allows me to really connect with the young adults that I work with. And my job is to just get creative. What do they need? Who are they? What's the goals? How does the family want to support them? And then we go from there. It's like a blank canvas.
I love that so much. Well, I was going to ask you, why did you, because I didn't really even realize this existed. And I feel sad about that because as a school counselor, and I do have some school counselors that listen, this is such a great, I wish I would have known about this type of service because many parents would come to us about, my child needs this, that, whatever. And I'd just be like, well, I looked up some stuff on the internet, or here's this list of people. I don't know if they, even work anymore, or whatever. And so, your ideas would be fresh and who you're recommending them to or whatever. So you have a therapist background
Yes.
and, why did you decide I love these young adults?
Well, it started about really 14 years ago at this point. I had my first experience working with college age students because prior to that point, I had only ever worked in mostly therapeutic or like tourism, outdoor oriented kind of jobs, short-term stuff. It was all fun. I was constantly in motion, and I'm always with people, right? There's a hospitality component to it. And so I love those connections. But what I was finding was that more and more I was leaning more towards a therapeutic or supportive kind of population or structure in programming or the job that I was working. And so I was realizing, kind of coming to age in the post-college work world, well, what do I want to do? I think I want to become a therapist. That makes the most sense for where I'm at. I don't want to be kind of frontline staff forever, or constantly in motion with looking for other jobs. It would be nice to be kind of settled. So I went back and got my master's, and it was while I was getting my master's that at that point I was already 10 years older than first year, like incoming first year students. And I just was completely taken aback with how different they were in terms of their level of independence, autonomy, like the increase in the lack of socialization or increase of mental health, increase of like grief, loss. It was just this existential growing crisis that I
Mm.
was noticing that in a non-sadistic way. I was like, this is fascinating. But the
Mhm.
kicker in all of it is they're over the age of 18. So
Yeah.
they can be making decisions. The choices that they make, they live with the natural or logical consequences to those situations. There's just a beautiful opportunity for an adult to adult conversation as a
Mhm.
support without
Mhm.
having the influence of parents.
Yes.
So I loved it. I wanted to continue to work with this population. Totally veered off track. I worked in higher ed for 5 years.
Mm.
It was during that time that I really, again, just I solidified. I love this population. I love working with this population because developmentally they still can show up very dependent or very in need of skill building and support. But again, they're adults. So they're
Mhm.
technically supposed to be on their own or like headed in that direction. And so I kept mulling over this, like, how do I marry
Mhm.
all of the things that I've done in the past and get to this place of like continuing to work with this population. So long story short, I ended up segueing away from higher education because I realized it wasn't about working for one system or one program or one organization. It was I selfishly want to know all the great places or all the like super hidden, like you have to like search for them, opportunities or resources for young adult populations so that I could be that point of contact, like as the student is taking a step away from higher ed, like, hey, that didn't work out for me. What the heck do I do?
Mhm.
Before it's even at that point of crisis, how do I help them like immediately, like rubber meets the road, continuing with some redirection or momentum so that they can get back to college if that's what the plan is, or just get on a path that's better suited for them. So
Mm.
I love it. Love
Yes.
it. It really challenges me on a daily basis because on one hand, I absolutely have to understand like mental health diagnoses and what matches up with somebody that is presenting with certain struggles. What is an appropriate type of professional that would be great in helping that person? But then on the other hand, I just need to have awareness and understanding of what trends are showing up, what types of resources are popping up, what is the evolution or fluidity of, again, what is available to this population.
Mhm.
So it just keeps me
Mhm.
on my toes.
Yeah, well, I bet it's changing all the time because I'm sure, I mean, coaching has been around for longer than I knew of it, but
Mm,
I know it's really being more of a thing out there. I feel like it can be the stopgap between, someone who's struggling and maybe they need therapy, but if they have to wait 6 months to get to the therapist,
yep.
life coaching, I think, is a great in between part where they could maybe help them with, managing something or the struggling that they're going through before they get to the
Yeah.
next thing. And so I'm glad I'm on your list of like
Yep.
possible if somebody's, in that kind of realm, you know about me. So I love that. One of the things you also have is a podcast, and I'm going to look at the name of it again because I don't, oh, I could probably ask you to just say the name of it, but you have a podcast, Success is Subjective. And I just love that because I had a weird, not weird, I'm using weird a lot lately and I don't want to use it. I had a non-typical time in college at the beginning. And actually, it's probably more typical of a lot of kids now. But when I went to college for the first time right out of high school, it was 1986. And I went from this tiny class of 47 kids to the state university where there's thousands of people. And I wanted to do that because I'm like, look at me, I'm getting out of this dumb town. I'm doing all these things. It's gonna be so great. I I went there. I didn't even have any fear of it. I'm just like, I am moving up in the world and I'm gonna do this stuff. Well, as soon as I get there, I'm like, oh, I don't know anyone here. My friend came and my friend and I decided we wouldn't room together because we heard that story of you room with your friend, you're not friends with them anymore. We wanted to be friends. So she was on the floor above me. And then we just picked, whoever was our roommate, this was our new person that we would get to know and be friends with. And I had a boyfriend that I just started dating back home before I left. Like when I graduated from high school, I didn't even know who he was. In the summer before I left, I met him and I'm like, oh, I'm in love. This is the love of my life and I want to marry him. And I did. But at that time, I was just like, I just wanted to go home all the time because I wanted to see him. I was missing home, even though I thought I wasn't going to miss it. I was used to everybody knowing who I am and being not a popular person, but a well-known person. Like I was involved in a lot of stuff and people knew who I was. And so then I go to this place and nobody knows me. And I kind of liked being the center of attention. And then I wasn't anymore. And just a whole lot of things. And I left college. I think it was the end of October. I left my door. I just packed up all my stuff, put it in my car, and I went to live with my boyfriend. I did not tell my parents that I left. I didn't even tell my friend who I went to college with that I left. She still tells me to this day how devastated she was when she went down to see if I wanted to go to lunch or whatever, and my whole entire dorm room is empty because the roommate that I had, she was never there either, and she ended up going to live with her boyfriend too. So it was like this weird thing. But anyway, I I did luckily go back to college then that January, and I went to a smaller school that I could go to drive to and still live with my boyfriend. But I think about as a parent now, and my daughter has been through college and is now an adult and married and all that and has a job. But I think about what if she would have dropped out of college just and never told me, and then I find out later that she isn't even there anymore. I would have been devastated. I would have thought her life is ruined. She's never going to amount to anything. And I'm sure that's what my parents thought. My parents were mad at me. So I know that parents aren't part of like, they can't do the work for their kid and they shouldn't, but they maybe are the first point of contact with you because they're in that situation. Like, my child's life is going off the rails. What do I do? Is
Yeah,
that correct?
it is. Yeah, usually the parents are the first point of contact. And honestly, sometimes it's because they stumble across the podcast,
Oh, yeah.
hear a couple stories,
Yeah.
and then they say, that sounds like my child's situation, maybe, or like, episode whatever, insert a particular guest, and they're like, I listened to that episode and that story just resonated very similarly with what's going on with our child. And we were curious if you might be able to connect with them and help. So
Yeah. I hope, and when I think about my story, I'm like, oh, I hope my story helps people. Like, they're like, oh, my life, because I'm very successful and I'm very happy and my life is amazing. I just didn't have that figured out yet. I think I was too immature to go to school right out of high school, but we're not told that there are these other options, I don't think. Are you finding that too, that people don't know there's another option besides go to college?
yeah, I mean, I would say honestly, within the last, really since the pandemic, so the last 4 years, I feel like the messaging around normalizing or kind of increasing awareness, specifically in the gap year space, like the
Mhm.
acceptance of gap programs or participating in an experience, is more pronounced
Mm.
because I think more colleges have really shifted to encourage that. as a
Mhm.
way to, again, still capture students from but coming and staying, if that means, hey,
Yeah.
take some time before you actually enroll. And so I think that that's adjusted. And my hope, honestly, is that it continues to
Mhm.
increase because there's such a benefit in not immediately going straight from high school to college, honestly,
Mhm.
for some of the reasons that you just described for your own
Yes.
story. Like sometimes I love it when I think there's a book out there, I forget what it's called, like the reasons why students select the colleges that they picked. And when
Mhm.
you read it, you're like, oh no, why would you
Yes.
pick a school for that reason? Right? Like,
Yes.
oh, I have to get as far away from home as possible. And that ends
Mhm.
up being the young person that needs to be the closest to home
Yes.
because
Yes.
maybe they have strong attachments and don't realize it, or they're really anxious and they don't realize it, how
Mm.
that's going to impact them when they go to a large school or a school
Yep.
really far away. So it's been a field for a long time, but it
Mhm.
certainly has grown exponentially. And I think the other component to that too is that more of those gap experiences are expanding to having like life coaches on staff or
Mm.
are actually looping in clinicians who are maybe not necessarily serving as therapists, depending on where the program is located, but just having some clinical oversight in working with a growing population of young people that do have a baseline of some anxiety or some depression, because gosh, we just experienced global grief.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it might be helpful to have somebody, but that's also kind of an expansion on the gap programs or services or experiences that are out there now too.
Oh, I love that so much. And I think I know what book you're talking about. I don't, is it this one, Choosing College? I love this book. Look, see this?
Yeah.
Like I did some podcast episodes about it because I'm like, this, oh, I wish I would have known this book when I
Yeah.
was a school counselor because I saw kids constantly, and you can't talk them out of it a lot of times, but because I mean, I didn't have all this knowledge of what I could say from this book because he really puts out like the exact reasons why somebody chooses and they're, why they're wrong reasons to do it. But I would have kids that were just like, well, I just want to go with my friends. I just want to be where my friends are. And I'm like, but what are you going to do there? Well, I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm just going to go with my friends. And I'm like, this isn't going to work out.
Yeah.
Or kids that are like hating high school, like hating it, never doing any of the work, like
Yeah.
just being like angry about being there, but they're going to college. And I'm like, college is school. Like you have to do your work. Like
And
it
you're
was so
choosing to
crazy.
be there. So
I
it's not even
know.
like you're required. It's like you're opting for another 4+ years
I
of
know.
volunteer education that
Yeah.
also is completely self-driven. Are you,
Yeah.
do you know what you're signing up for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have no idea because it just seems like fun. And truthfully, when I went, and I did want to get an education, but I was going for those same reasons. I want to get out of my town. I
Mm.
want to get away from my parents. I want to go where my friend, there was probably other kids that I knew from my school, but very few. But I want to go where my friend is going. Because I was like, well, what would I do if I stayed in my tiny town? I didn't want to do any of the jobs that were available to girls at that time. Like literally, I don't know. If any of my high school friends listen to this, I'll be sad, but there were very few girls from my class who even went to college because it was like, well, we'll just be a secretary down the street or I don't know. I don't, and I never was that person. But then when I got there and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do, I just had to find a way to, I knew I wanted to live with my boyfriend. And I was like, how can I live with my boyfriend and still go to school? And so I didn't have any help figuring that out, but it probably would have helped me for somebody to been able to say, well, here's some other options. Here's some ways to make your life work. And so I love that you're out there doing that because young people need this help so much. And their parents, even though they're not the ones like doing the work or whatever,
Mm.
I think you probably help parents feel better that my child's life isn't ruined. Like they can do these other things or these other things are available. And so you have some resources on your website, some free resources. I was looking at them today and downloaded a couple of them because I think some of my clients maybe just need some of these little checklists or ideas or whatever. But parents and or young adults that are listening can get on your website and set up a time to talk to you and just really find out more about you in general. But so is it just like a calendar type thing, or is it an email where then you talk back and forth and find a time? How does that work?
Yep, it's a calendar. I totally live my life by way of a calendar at this point.
Hmm.
Usually families will, like you were just talking about, they somehow find the website either from the podcast or just they find the website themselves. And then they're kind of scrolling through to find the types of resources that really speak to them. That's what they
Hmm.
need in that moment or to help their child. There is a web inquiry that the parents can actually fill out, and really the only thing that's required on there is the child's name and the parent's name and how I'm
Hmm.
supposed to contact them. And usually when I get that inquiry, then I just send them the link to the calendar so they can
Hmm.
find a time that works for them. And from there, kind of like we talked about earlier, the parents are usually the ones that are reaching out to me first, right? They're the
Hmm.
first wave of doing that initial outreach and kind of like information gathering to understand from the parent perspective. A lot of it
Hmm.
is, again, it boils down to what you just talked about, Cynthia. Like, is my child going to be okay? I need to
Hmm.
connect with somebody that's going to lead me and my child to a place of understanding that whatever happens, it's going to be okay. So
Hmm.
I'll speak with the parents first. They'll usually fill me in on what's going on with their young adult. Like you said too earlier, is it a high school senior and we're trying to figure out what's going on, or is it already somebody that is, launched into higher education, or are they still at home as a, early 20 somethings? What do we do? Right? There's always these,
Hmm.
there's lots of questions. And so I'll initially speak with the parents first, and that is complimentary. And then if I feel like I've got a good dynamic with them, we're relatable, whatever it is that they are telling me doesn't scare me off in
Yeah.
thinking that I would not be a good fit to work with their young adult, then the next step is actually for me to connect with the young adult.
Hmm.
That conversation really is a two-way interview as well. Like, do you understand why you're speaking with me? Do you know what I represent? Like, do you feel like you want your life to look differently? What do you want? I mean, I'm asking like some fairly vague questions, very
Hmm.
broad questions, and then also really specific questions. And that part of it is just really rapport building. Is this somebody that I think I can connect with as a
Hmm.
consultant to help them as an objective party throughout this journey for the next few months? And then from there, that young adult is the one that makes the decision of whether or not they
Hmm.
want to work with me. So if
Yeah.
they say yes, then we jump in.
Yeah. That is so great. Even with the younger ones that I work with, I still want I want the child, the teen to say, yes, I want to work with her because their parents forcing them to work with me doesn't work anyway.
Yeah.
Like you have to have a good rapport with somebody.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find where parents are shopping around kind of for the person that feels good. And I love that. That is exactly what needs to happen. Don't
Mhm.
just say your child, needs to work with one person. Like there's a realm of things,
Yep.
and you're helping connect them to something. But I'm sure if they came back to you and were like, oh, that didn't feel like a good fit, or I didn't like it, or whatever, then you help them find the thing that does fit for them, because you have to feel it. You have to like be part of, you
Yep.
have to feel like you want to work with that group or that person or whatever. So tell us about your website, and like how do people find that? How do they find your podcast? Is it everywhere? Just tell us that stuff.
The website is www.lillyconsulting.com, and that's spelled Lilley. I would actually say that a lot of times parents are finding the website first because sometimes they are searching for something specifically. And this was a, a pre-COVID marketing strategy that I did that is proving to really pay off, is that a lot of those freebies that are on the website, or some of the very specific things that will consistently remain with first year students, are popping up. And so what I mean by that, probably the number one resource on my website is I have a document that lists the top 6 forms that parents want to have their young adult fill out before going to college.
I
And
love
it is
that.
It is so helpful. Like I said, I think that's probably the number one driver for families that are even landing on my page. And do I ever speak with them? Probably a small fraction, but they find that article and they use those resources, and that's what's helpful. So beyond that, the podcast itself is hosted on all podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, you name it. It's called Success is Subjective. And a big part of me launching that back in 2019 was truly because I kept, I mean, going back again to our conversation, it's just this
Mhm.
idea that there is a life is linear, that success looks only one way, which is
Mhm.
go to college, get the degree, get the job, make money, get a family. And it's just,
Mhm.
it's so formulaic and also unrealistic.
Yes.
It happens in that order, if at all, in some of those
Mhm.
components. And so I just wanted to humanize
Mhm.
that we do experience adversity, that change is welcome, that life has hiccups, and that as a parent, if you have a child that is dealing with some of these non-linear situations, whether it is mental health related or not, taking a break from
Mhm.
college or not going to college, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be okay. It just means
Yeah.
that maybe the vision that you had for them does require you actually grieving that vision
Yes.
in
Yes.
order to give space for whatever beautiful thing your child is getting ready to do or become connected with. And that's a transition, that's an evolution.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I created this podcast as a means, and I'm grateful I had you as a guest. So you want to
Mhm.
listen to that podcast and make sure you hear all of Cynthia's story. Um,
Mhm.
but it just allows me to cast a wide net of people that are willing to vulnerably share. Here's where I thought I was going to be at 18. Here's where I really was, and here's where I am later in life. And like,
Yeah.
and then demystifying or debunking that definition of what success needs to be across the board. So again, it just shifts from this place of like rigidity and expectations to acceptance and fluidity. Yeah.
I love that so much because I saw there's more of that. There's more of the all different ways to get there than there is this everybody does it the same way. And we just get caught up in it's supposed to look a certain way, whether we're the parents thinking it's supposed to look a certain way, or society, or the kid, or whatever. And I just love it that you can help families find all the different ways and it's still all good.
Yeah.
And that's great. So I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you want my audience to know? I'm definitely going to put all your stuff in the show notes so that they can find you and connect with you if they want to, but is there anything else you want families to know or young adults to know?
Yeah, I think, well, two things, and I'll try to be brief, is that hopefully in hearing my voice that you interpret that I am an approachable and genuinely interested individual in getting to know that young person and helping them figure out what it is that they want to do or how and where they need to be. And a part of that approachability too is my job really is to match the pace of the young adult. Like I don't pressure anybody into doing anything. My job as a trained clinician is do no harm to clients. And so I use that as
Mhm.
a lens. Like the last thing that I ever want to do is connect a client with a resource that is going to do the exact opposite of what it is
Mhm.
that we're wanting for them. So that's important. The other thing that I'll just put in there as a plug, because you also mentioned this, like, hey, as a school counselor, you didn't know that people like me existed. And there
Yeah.
certainly are people that work with just like younger,
Mhm.
students, like
Mhm.
tweens and teens. And then there's me, obviously, working with young adults. But I, at one point, was the board chair for the Therapeutic Consulting Association. And so that is what I feel like is a reputable consulting organization that has about almost 80
Mm.
consultants nationwide with their expertise or specialties listed on the site. So if you're a parent looking for help, and I'm not the person, but now this is the first time that you're hearing that there are people like me that exist, I would say go to that site and see if there's someone
Mhm.
there that can help you in whatever area you need.
I'm going to put that in the show notes too, and just have it for my own reference because even though I don't work with parents, because I'm working with minors for the most part, I am still, talking with parents and trying to help parents feel okay about what's going on in their lives. And that could be, just going to that site and trying to find help that way is great too. So I am so glad you were my guest. I'm so glad that you reached out to me. I think originally you said, "Hey, I think I need to know you." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we totally need to know each other." So it's wonderful. And I hope this is not the last time that we talk to each other, but thank you for being on my podcast.
Thanks again for having me.
Uh-huh. You're welcome.